This is one of the most successful life forms on our planet. They existed 100 million years before the dinosaurs. They're skilled at aerobatics, and they're merciless predators. Their appearance and their life cycle are so strange, they could be visitors from another world. These are the dragonflies. Science has given them colorful names: broad-bodied chaser, four-spotted chaser, scarlet dragonfly. Some glimmer like liquid metal. Others seem to be fashioned out of stained glass or enamel. These are creatures that have barely changed in hundreds of millions of years. From the very beginning, they have been perfect sky hunters. In 1558, the French naturalist Guillaume Rondelet noted a distinct resemblance between the hammerhead shark and a small insect. The first mention in scientific literature of dragonflies and the smaller damselflies. Their habitats are just as varied as the forms they take. But they always have to be close to fresh water. That plays a vital part in their life cycle. All dragonflies are excellent flyers, but they fly in different styles. The smaller damselflies tend to be more cautious. They're not known for daring aerobatics or sudden swooping attacks. They move in a graceful, weightless ballet. Big dragonflies look like marauding fighter planes. They patrol their territory at more than 50 kilometers an hour. They hover like a helicopter and dart off at top speed from a standing start. They beat their wings so slowly, only about 30 flaps a second, we don't hear a hum or a buzz, but a sizzle. Their body design makes them perfect predators. 300 million years of evolution have given them the tools to devour any insect prey. They wait at raised observation points, on the lookout. They hunt anything they can overpower. That includes flies, wasps, butterflies, even their own species. Dragonflies have a well-earned reputation as cannibals. Wherever there's water, there are not just dragonflies but also potential prey. A dead fish on the riverbank attracts an army of flies. Within a few days, their maggots will have consumed it from the inside. But these bluebottles leaping on and off the body are being watched by a female darter. Her razor-sharp mandibles consume the best parts in minutes. The bigger species need plenty of nutrition to provide energy for their powerful bodies, and there's no shortage of larger prey, such as butterflies. In some places, for instance on Greek islands, there are real mass gatherings of moths, like these Jersey tigers. Jersey tigers tend to gather near water sources, and that's also the perfect habitat for dragonflies. But even in ordinary fields, species like the peacock butterfly are anything but safe. Even big moths are quickly consumed. This one will soon be gone. Scientists have been collecting dragonflies since the 18th century. But there's always been a difficulty. Dragonflies quickly become deathly pale. They lose all their color. That's why collectors have usually preferred to concentrate on butterflies. They're more colorful and don't lose their pigment when they die. The reason is that their wings are covered in colored scales. The scales lie on top of each other like roof tiles. Many shimmer brightly, depending on the angle of the light. Of course, there are exceptions. The wings of the glass moth have very few color scales. They look a lot like the transparent wings of a dragonfly. Dragonflies are found on all continents. Their flying skills are astonishing. At the end of the Middle Ages, humans set out to discover new continents. Dragonflies were way ahead of them. Some have been found in mid-ocean, 550 kilometers from land. They can fly from Libya to Iceland in 4 days. With the wind behind them, their speed has been measured at more than 130 kilometers an hour. Many dragonfly species are based in the tropics in South and Central America. There's no shortage of fresh water and long stretches of swamps and rainforest. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of dragonfly species are still unknown to science. Dragonflies stand out. Many other animals in the rainforest notice them, even if they aren't on their menu. Capuchin monkeys are very observant, and flitting dragonflies are a good source of entertainment. Dragonflies are found in equatorial regions right around the globe. Of course, in East Africa, the big animals are more conspicuous and more popular. Easy to forget that dragonflies have lived in Africa for so much longer than the great mammals. They were here long before there were rhinos, giraffes, or elephants. Dragonflies have settled in the most inhospitable places, like the Sahara. Dragonflies have something vital in common with human civilization. Both depend on fresh water. This ancient civilization flourished thanks to the River Nile. Its papyrus marshes have always offered a home to dragonflies. The ancient Egyptians worshipped their gods in the form of animals. Insects also played an important role for them. 3,400 years ago, they immortalized dragonflies in their tombs. We humans have 4 million years of history, a history we know so little about. Dragonflies are 80 times as old as we are. They originated an astonishing 320 million years ago. In those distant times, there was just one single supercontinent, Pangaea. At that time, the greatest variety of life was in the waters of the ancient oceans, where life began. Some of the most complex creatures were the crustacea. Transparent jellyfish, too, swam in both the oceans and the coastal regions. But it would take considerably longer before life could establish itself on land. The conquest of the land by plants was a slow process. About 330 million years ago, evolution came up with something new: forests covering huge stretches of the earth. In the Carboniferous, fern and club moss trees covered wide areas. Horsetails grew up to 10 meters. But these jungles contained relatively few animal species. Fish, breathing through lungs, had made the move from water onto land, becoming primitive amphibians. And there were giant scorpions, as well as huge spiders, and 2-meter-long multi-limbed arthropods. But the fern forests concealed other giants, the ancestors of today's dragonflies. Even 300 million years ago, their body plan was so perfect that it has barely changed since, except in size. The giant dragonflies of the Carboniferous had a wingspan of more than 70 centimeters. It was a time of permanent geological change, when the Earth eroded and shifted. If a dragonfly died without being eaten by a scorpion or some other creature, there was a good chance it would be preserved. Quite quickly, it was buried in sand and other materials. Geysers and mud often did the rest. Before long, the body would be completely covered. The makeup of the earth and the lack of oxygen hindered decomposition. The mud deposits turned into a time capsule. Over hundreds of millions of years, the organic layers turned to stone, and their contents to fossils. But although the dragonfly's bodies left perfect imprints, all we have from the Carboniferous period are traces in relief. About 200 million years ago, in the Triassic period, the world got a new look. Giant ginkgo forests now covered large parts of the Earth. But the Triassic also brought a revolution among land animals. The first dinosaurs arrive on the evolutionary scene. They will rule the Earth for 170 million years. Resin seeps out of wounds in the bark of the ginkgo trees. Slowly, the viscous fluid oozes down, dripping off leaves onto the ground. Everything this sticky, glutinous fluid touches is doomed. In places, resin flows like lava, trapping tiny particles on its way. When dragonflies come into contact with it, their delicate wings can't help them escape. More and more resin lands on them, until the dragonfly is completely covered. Perfect, airtight conservation. This million-year-old resin survived to be washed up on the shores of the Baltic and the Caribbean. We know it as amber. And very often, there's something trapped inside. These ancient prisoners are proof that dragonflies have barely changed over the ages. And the reason that time has had no effect on the shape of the dragonfly is that its body design is virtually perfect. Its entire body is covered in armor made of chitin. The most notable feature is its head. It's dominated by two gigantic eyes, but they work quite differently from a mammal's. Each eye is composed of up to 30,000 honeycombed eyes, forming a hemisphere. These compound eyes give almost 360-degree vision. Dragonflies probably see better than any other insect. But the most amazing thing about dragonflies are its two pairs of wings. They're constructed round a network of lateral and longitudinal arteries. A transparent parchment-like membrane is stretched between them. A thin, waxy sheath creates the lotus effect, preventing particles of dust sticking to the wings. Dragonflies are fast, tireless flyers. They quickly open up new territories. A dragonfly on a reconnaissance flight can reach a height of several hundred meters. Areas of reeds have an almost magical appeal. But often the best habitats are already occupied by other dragonflies, and they will defend their territory against any intruder. Dragonflies know only the law of the strong. A battle for supremacy is inevitable. The aim is to repulse the enemy. The end often sees the loser falling into the water. If it falls in deep enough, it won't get out again. The European pond terrapin has remarkable eyesight. These carnivorous reptiles are not going to let a drenched insect get away. In spite of all these losses, enough dragonflies escape for the survival of the species. Their complicated mating process is an ancient inheritance, unique in the natural world. The male grips the female behind its head with pincers at the end of its abdomen. The female twists her lower body forward to unite with the male's semen sac on the underside of his abdomen. The unusual position that results is known as a mating wheel. The male's grip can last several seconds, or as long as an hour. All dragonflies, and the smaller damselflies, form the mating wheel. Many damselflies stay connected while they lay their eggs. This usually takes place in the water. The females poke their abdomen under the surface to deposit their eggs on water plants or leaves. All this time, the male still clasps the female behind her head. At good locations, eggs are often laid en masse. Dozens of couples gather. They call these couples tandems because they fly around in this position. Many female damselflies dive underwater to attach their eggs to the plants. They can stay down for up to 90 minutes. These meadowhawks have a different strategy. Males and females stay united in their tandem and individually tap their eggs onto water plants. In some species of dragonfly, the female lays her eggs alone. They choose a variety of places, sometimes on the water's surface. At other times, they stick their abdomens deep into the water to place their eggs. But not all dragonfly species lay their eggs directly in the water. Some hide them in moss cushions or between stones. Rain showers will eventually flush the eggs into the water. The number of eggs varies between species, from as little as 50 to several thousand. but they're all tiny. The biggest measure hardly more than 0.5 millimeter. Central Europe has more than 200 different species of willow. They're typical of wet zones. They grow next to ponds, in water meadows, or along the banks of streams. When they blossom in spring, we know their flowers as catkins. But in the middle of summer, they attract a very unusual insect and demonstrate an ingenious survival strategy. The willow emerald damselfly lays its eggs directly in willow bark. When this happens, the male and female are usually still joined in tandem. Each couple can lay up to 200 eggs. For the parents, that's the end of the matter. Deep inside the bark, the clutch of eggs survives the winter. Snow and freezing cold make little impression. By the following year, in the springtime, they're ready. Months later, after the catkin blossoms, tiny creatures emerge from the rind. These are the microlarvae. If they're lucky, they fall straight into water. Where there's water, there's life, even at a man-made source in the middle of a city. Hooded crows enjoy the bubbling waters, not just as a drink, but also as a refreshing bath. So it's not surprising if dragonflies are found here too. Whether in the country or in town, dragonflies often find their way through an open window into a building. Maybe even into the Natural History Museum. For this lost insect, it's a journey millions of years back in time, when dinosaurs ruled the earth and were part of a dragonfly's everyday experience. Thunderstorms, a natural phenomenon most dragonflies experience because most are active in early and mid-summer. When the sky darkens, many stop flying and look for places to rest. They'll most likely spend the night here too. Dragonflies are well protected from most environmental influences. Rain doesn't usually worry them. Thanks to the lotus effect, raindrops just slip off their wings. But sometimes storms become real downpours. With the cooling effect of the rain, dragonflies lose their strength, and many can no longer hold on. If they land in the water, it's all over. And when the sun comes out again, there's a feast on offer. Frogs aren't the only animals that snap up dislodged dragonflies. Ducks, too, happily scoop up a dripping morsel. But most of the dragonflies survive the storm unharmed. Dragonflies have two lives. They spend one of them as virtuoso aviators. The other is lived in secret, underwater. The dragonfly eggs have turned into larvae. Their body plan seems strange, even extraterrestrial. Damselfly larvae have slim bodies with rudder blades at the end. These are covered with fine tracheal systems that function like lungs. Damselfly and dragonfly larvae can live in water for many months, even years. But they already have two things in common with adults of their species: their great compound eyes and their predator's instincts. Dragonfly larvae eat worms and fly larvae, but also vertebrates. Tadpoles and small fish are on the menu too. Their potential prey may be many times their size. Dragonfly larvae can be several centimeters long. When they spot their prey, they creep towards it. Once the victim's in range, they act with lightning speed. They have an extension to their lower jaw that can shoot forward in 20 milliseconds, grabbing their quarry and dragging it into their mandibles. There, it's dismembered and eaten alive. This unique method of catching prey has inspired the design of many a sci-fi alien in the movies. It may seem brutal, but it's no different from the way a lion or a hyena kills its victims and tears them apart. After several months, or for some species several years, the dragonfly larvae finally move on. Usually by climbing reed stalks or swamp plants. It's time for the great metamorphosis that turns a larva into a dragonfly. Pressure builds up inside the body until the larva's skin bursts and the shriveled dragonfly emerges. It pumps blood into its wings and around its body to reach its final form. This process can take an hour or more. When its chitin carapace has hardened, it begins to shiver itself warm before taking its maiden flight. The only memento of its earlier form is the larva's abandoned skin, the exuvia. Sometimes so many dragonflies hatch at the same time they make a swarm. Depending on the species, they will separate almost at once, or fly hundreds of kilometers together, often towards the Mediterranean. But many dragonflies die almost as soon as they hatch. There are bird species that specialize in hunting large insects. Like bee-eaters. These brightly colored birds breed in holes in mud cliffs, and their young are permanently hungry. They don't only hunt stinging insects. They're especially fond of dragonflies. Bee-eaters like to catch their prey in mid-air. If they see a dragonfly, it has little chance. Every day, dozens end up caught in these sharp beaks. These dangerous enemies are found close to water, spiders. Even with their excellent eyesight, dragonflies can't spot their webs. In the breeding season, losses are especially high. The wasp spider is a very successful dragonfly hunter. The first bite paralyzes this damselfly. Then the spider wraps it up like a mummy. Its fate is sealed. It's now a ready meal, to be eaten later. But spiders aren't the only enemy in the thick vegetation of the riverbank. Praying mantises are just as dangerous. They're lightning-fast hunters, pitiless eating machines. But then dragonflies are really no different. One predator vanquishes another. But all these daily losses won't threaten the survival of the species. Fast-flowing rivers and streams don't seem to be the ideal habitat for delicate dragonflies at first sight. If there's enough greenery on the riverbanks, this is where you'll find some of the most beautiful damselflies, the demoiselles. In contrast to other species, their wings are not transparent, but shimmer in metallic blues and greens. And their flying style is quite different from the others. They don't zip from place to place, but flit graciously, like a butterfly. It can only be appreciated in slow motion. Demoiselles have a wingspan of around 7 centimeters. There are two kinds, the beautiful demoiselle and the banded demoiselle. They live in similar habitats and show the same behavior. These are social insects. They often flock together in large groups. Riverbank plants now become very important, serving as lookout posts. Demoiselles have a highly developed sense of territory. The males sit on the most exposed twigs and leaves. After a patrol, they always return to the same place. And then they start a rhythmic wing clapping. Experts think this is a form of communication within the group. A male demoiselle has only one priority: to impress a female, so he can mate with her and so guarantee the survival of the species. It's hard to find wetlands that are completely untouched by humans. Spring fens and low moors are relatively unspoiled. This mossy, swampy terrain with its puddles and ponds is irresistible to dragonflies. This is where the southern skimmer lives, a rare species that needs a warm climate. This bright blue dragonfly was discovered relatively recently by science. The first description dates from 1837. An anonymous-looking plant often grows among the moss. The edges of its green fleshy leaves turn upwards to make them look like a canoe. This is the butterwort. This inconspicuous plant is deadly to insects. The soil here isn't nutritious, so the butterwort compensates by catching insects. Its leaves are covered in tiny, sticky drops. Deadly traps for dragonflies. At the same time, the plant secretes a digestive fluid. The dragonfly is slowly dissolved, and the butterwort absorbs the nutrients. Hill moors are an even more extreme habitat. Carnivorous plants are everywhere. The round-leaved sundew is the best known of them. These glistening droplets look so inviting, like dew or nectar. But they're sticky, and if an insect comes into contact with them, it usually can't get away. Bigger prey like dragonflies are overcome by several parts of a plant working together. If the insect struggles, more liquid is secreted. This damselfly desperately tries to swallow the plant's secretion, but it won't help. The sundew's digestive enzymes simply get into the damselfly's body and dissolve it even faster. Near the end of a dragonfly's life, it's often lost parts of its wings, and the colors have begun to fade. It's a brief existence, 7 or 8 week-old dragonflies are ancient. If they haven't been eaten by their natural enemies, they'll eventually fall exhausted to the ground. Damselflies have an even shorter life, not more than 1 or 2 weeks. They fulfill a biological function even after death. They're food for other animals, such as ants. But the biggest enemy of dragonflies is autumn and winter. As the temperatures drop, dragonflies have no chance of survival. They're cold-blooded and depend on a warm environment to keep their metabolism going. With the first frosts, the dragonfly season rapidly reaches its end. Further south, close to the Mediterranean, they have a longer lease on life. Often they live on small, sometimes tiny, rocky islands. There may be no source of fresh water. Local vegetation has adapted to the desert conditions. Humans, too, have colonized these inhospitable islands using technology. But how do dragonflies survive without fresh water? The answer is simple and strange. Individuals constantly fly in from over the sea because without a supply of fresh water, it's impossible to reproduce. When winter takes hold in the temperate zones, all the dragonflies have died. The next generation spend the winter as larvae beneath the surface, in waters that never freeze. But some insects manage to survive the frost and ice. Like the brimstone butterfly, it can be frozen stiff but will thaw into life again in spring. This is made possible by the glycol in its blood. And the same is true of the winter damselfly. Of the thousands of dragonfly and damselfly species, only 2 can survive the winter. When the spring sunshine awakens the insects, the ancient cycle of life begins again. Dragonflies will soon take to the air, as they have for 300 million years, unfathomable ages before the time of the dinosaurs or human beings.